The diner door exploded open at 11:47 on the worst night of the year. She was 10 years old, soaking wet, strapped into a wheelchair she could barely control, and she was holding a baby. Not carrying him, clutching him, like someone had already tried to take him. She rolled through the threshold with rain pouring off her jacket, found the one man sitting alone at the counter, and said 6 words that stopped every conversation in the room. "Please, don't let them take us." Cole Barrett set down his coffee. Ranger stood up. And the worst night of Cole's life and the most important had just begun. This is your first time here, subscribe, hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Don't go anywhere. This one goes deep. The storm had been building since noon. By 8 o'clock, it had swallowed the highway whole visibility down to maybe 40 yards past the shoulder, freezing rain coming in sideways off the lake, the kind of weather that made dispatchers nervous and kept tow trucks working double shifts. The forecast had called for a winter advisory. What arrived was something closer to a siege. Cole Barrett had been living in Millhaven for 14 months, and in that time he had developed exactly one reliable evening ritual: Tuesday dinners at Patty's Roadside with Jamie and Ranger, booth near the back, the same order every week, gone before 9. It wasn't sentimental. It was just structure. After 12 years doing work that had no structure at all, he had learned to build it wherever he could. He was 45 minutes into that ritual when everything changed. The diner was doing decent business for a Tuesday in January. Maybe 18 people total, a few truckers at the counter, 2 families spread across booths, a pair of highway workers nursing coffee by the door. Jamie sat across from Cole with the grilled cheese going cold in front of him, more interested in the condensation patterns on the window than his food. Ranger lay under the table with his chin on Cole's boot, the way he always did, half asleep but never fully off. Cole had just reached for his coffee when Ranger moved. Not a stretch, not a shift. A deliberate, controlled repositioning, front paws flat, ears rotated forward, weight forward on his haunches. The dog's nostrils flared twice. Cole's hand stopped midway to the mug. He had worked with Ranger for 4 years, in conditions that would make most people's nightmares look like afternoon daydreams. He knew every register of that animal's behavior. The low warning posture meant something was coming. Not danger exactly. Something requiring attention. He set the mug down without drinking. "Dad," Jamie said, "eat your sandwich." 2 seconds later, the door blew open. It wasn't a dramatic entrance in the cinematic sense, no silhouette against lightning, no swelling music. Just a burst of freezing air and noise that killed every conversation, and a 10-year-old girl in a manual wheelchair fighting the hydraulic door closer with everything she had, one hand on the wheel rim, one arm locked around a bundle of blankets pressed against her chest. She was soaked through. Her jacket, a thin purple thing with a broken zipper, was plastered to her shoulders, hair matted flat across her forehead, jeans dark from the knees down. Her sneakers were the kind with Velcro straps, and both were soaked black. What she was carrying in her arm wasn't a bundle. It was a baby. 11 months, maybe a year. Cole clocked the size in half a second, the way he clocked everything. The infant was bundled in a yellow receiving blanket that had been tucked and retucked with obvious care, the kind of careful that came from someone trying very hard to do something right while being terrified. The girl made it 3 feet inside before her right wheel caught on a floor mat seam and nearly pitched her sideways. She overcorrected, nearly dropped the baby, caught him, her arm tightening around him with a ferocity that made 2 women nearby stand up instinctively. "Oh, sweetheart," one of them started toward her. "I'm okay." The girl's voice was flat and clipped, not rude but armored. She didn't look up. She was scanning the room, dark eyes moving fast, and Cole recognized that behavior because he'd taught himself the same one at 22, find the exits, find the threats, find the one person who looked like they weren't going to make it worse. Her eyes found him. He wasn't sure why. He was sitting in the back booth, not the most visible seat, not wearing anything that marked him. Ranger had lifted his head above the table's edge, which probably helped. But the girl looked at Cole Barrett specifically and didn't look away, and she rolled toward him without hesitation, past the women who'd stood up, past the counter where a server was reaching for a towel, navigating the narrow channel between tables with her one free hand working the wheel in short, efficient strokes. She stopped at the edge of his booth. Up close, she was shivering hard enough that Cole could see it in her jaw, her shoulders, the hand on the wheel rim. The baby was making small sounds, not crying, more like the quiet protest of someone very tired and very cold. "Are you Cole Barrett?" she asked. That surprised him. He kept it off his face. "Yeah, my mom said she stopped." Swallowed. Started again. "My mom said you used to be in the Navy, that you were the kind of person who helped people even when it was hard." "Who's your mom?" "Claire Monroe." She watched his face for recognition. When she didn't find any, something flickered behind her eyes, not quite defeat, not quite panic. "She works at the Harbor Bridge Foundation? On Deacon Street?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know her. She knows you. She said you ate here every Tuesday." The girl's jaw tightened. She said you were the only person she trusted. Claude's response was interrupted. "In this town." Cole looked at the girl for a long moment. The diner had gone quiet in that particular way that meant everyone was pretending not to listen while listening to everything. He could feel it, the weight of 18 sets of ears angled toward his booth. He didn't address it. He just moved his jacket off the seat beside him and said, "Sit down." She didn't sit down. She stayed in her wheelchair, which he should have anticipated, and he felt mildly stupid for the instinct. But she rolled closer, and the server who'd grabbed a towel arrived at the same moment, and there was a brief negotiation of space that nobody narrated. The server handed the towel to the girl. The girl didn't take it because her arm was still locked around the baby, and Cole took it instead and held it out in a way that made it easier to accept. She took it with 2 fingers, pressed it against the baby's head first, then her own face. "What's your name?" Cole asked. "Sadie. Sadie Monroe." She was still scanning the room in short, controlled intervals. The behavior was specific enough that it registered with him, not the random glancing of a frightened child, but a pattern. She was tracking the door. "That's Eli." "Eli's your brother?" "Yes." "How old?" 11 months. She looked at Cole directly. "He's fine. He's not hurt. I kept him dry." The emphasis on "I kept him" landed with more weight than she probably intended, and Cole filed it away. Jamie had gone completely still on the other side of the booth, grilled cheese forgotten, watching Sadie with the open, undisguised attention of an 8-year-old who didn't yet know he was supposed to be more subtle about staring. "Jamie," Cole said quietly. "Yeah, stop staring." "I'm not staring." "You're absolutely staring." Jamie looked down at his plate, picked up his sandwich, put it down again. Ranger had not resumed his position under the table. He was sitting upright beside Cole's leg, oriented toward the front door, and he hadn't looked at the baby or at Sadie. He was watching the window, the one that faced the highway. That was the detail Cole kept coming back to. Not the girl, not the baby. Ranger was watching the window. "You said your mom sent you here," Cole said. He kept his voice low, and even the register he used when he needed someone scared to stay functional. "Where is she now?" "Her car broke down." Sadie's hand tightened on the wheel rim. "On Route 9. Maybe half a mile back from the junction," she said. "Right where the guardrail ends before the trees start." "When?" "About 40 minutes ago." She checked a cheap digital watch on her wrist. Kind kids got at pharmacy checkouts, and her expression shifted in a way that confirmed what he already suspected. The math was getting worse the longer they talked. "Maybe 45. She sent you half a mile in this weather?" He didn't say it accusatory, just stated the arithmetic. "She didn't want to." Sadie's jaw tightened. "She didn't have a choice. Her phone was dead, and we couldn't see any houses. But she could see the diner sign from the road. She said, 'Follow the sign. Find you specifically, give you.'" She stopped. Cole waited. The girl's free hand moved to somewhere beneath Eli's blanket. For a second, nothing happened, just the sound of the storm working at the window panes and the distant clatter of the kitchen and 18 people breathing carefully, and then she pulled out a small rectangular object, roughly the size of a thumb, and held it toward him. Flash drive. Black casing, no label, the kind that came in a 3-pack from a hardware store. Cole looked at it without reaching for it. What's on it? I don't know. Sadie's eyes were direct and steady. Whatever was frightening her, it wasn't him. She said you'd know what to do with it. She said if anything happened. Her voice cracked on the last word just barely, a hairline fracture she immediately sealed back up. She said if anything happened, the most important thing was that it got to someone she trusted, not the police. Why not the police? Sadie said. Cole reached out and took the flash drive. He turned it in his fingers once, felt the weight of it, basically nothing, 3 grams if that, and then closed his fist around it. Okay, that's it, Sadie said. Okay, for now, yeah. He looked at her evenly. I'm going to call 911 and report your mom's location. Search and rescue will, she said, not the police. Search and rescue isn't police. And your mother is alone on a highway in a blizzard. Whatever else is happening, that's the first problem. He was already pulling his phone. After that, you're going to tell me everything. Not the version that leaves things out. Everything. Deal? Sadie looked at him for a long moment with those dark, evaluating eyes, and he had the distinct impression that she was making a calculation more sophisticated than most adults in the room would have managed. Deal, she said. He made the call. Clean, efficient location, description, 2 subjects potentially on foot near the vehicle, no medical emergency reported but unknown duration of exposure. The dispatcher confirmed units in the area. He gave his name and callback number, ended the call, and pocketed his phone before the server had finished refilling the coffee at the next table. Donna, the woman who managed Patty's Tuesday nights, appeared at the edge of the booth with the expression of someone who had decided to be useful. She was mid-50s, wide-shouldered, and had the manner of a person who'd seen enough difficult situations to stop performing distress about them. I've got formula in the back, she said. We keep it for emergencies. She looked at Eli. He looks hungry. Sadie opened her mouth. She's right, Cole said, not unkindly. Let her help with Eli. You need both hands free to talk. The girl's grip on the baby didn't loosen immediately. That arm had been locked, for Cole checked the timeline, probably the better part of an hour in freezing conditions, and the muscle had memory of it. But after a moment, Sadie let Donna take Eli, watching the handoff with the intensity of someone diffusing something. Donna murmured something to the baby that Cole didn't catch, and Eli, apparently deciding this woman was acceptable, grabbed a fistful of her collar and made a sound like a very small but surprisingly confident landlord. Cole almost smiled, almost. Back office, Donna said. More private. He was already standing. The back office at Patty's roadside was generously described by that title. It was a 10 by 12 room with a particle board desk, a safe that hadn't been opened since the previous owner, 2 mismatched chairs, and a space heater that worked on the 3rd try. But it had a solid door that locked from the inside, no windows that faced the parking lot, and a phone line independent of the main counter. Cole had clocked those details the first week he'd eaten here, 14 months ago, out of a habit he'd never successfully broken. He got Sadie positioned near the heater. Donna settled into the corner with Eli and a bottle she'd produced from somewhere with impressive speed. Jamie came in last, shoulders slightly hunched, and Cole gave him a look that communicated, I know this is a lot. You're doing fine. And Jamie gave him back a look that communicated, I am holding it together, but I have questions. Ranger came in behind them all and lay down against the door. Not in front of the heater, against the door. Cole pulled the 2nd chair around and sat facing Sadie. Start from the beginning, he said. Not from tonight. From whatever made tonight happen. Sadie pulled the damp towel off her shoulders and held it in her lap instead of using it. A displacement behavior, something to do with her hands. He recognized it. My mom has worked at Harbor Bridge Foundation for 4 years, she began. Cole knew the name. Millhaven was a mid-sized city with the usual collection of nonprofits trying to cover the gaps that government programs didn't reach, and Harbor Bridge was one of the more visible ones, billboards on the North Corridor, a fundraising gala every November that got a half page in the local paper, a mission centered on accessible housing and medical transportation for disabled children and low-income families. He'd seen the logo enough times to picture it without effort. She's an accountant. She handles the books, the actual numbers, not the public reports, the real ledgers. Sadie's voice had settled into a careful, deliberate pace. She'd clearly organized this in her head before tonight. About 8 months ago, she started noticing things that didn't match. What kind of things? Contractors. There were payments going to contractors for work that didn't happen. She paused, clearly searching for precision. Not like small amounts. Like a ramp installation billed at $42,000 for a building that already had ramps. A van conversion billed twice for the same vehicle. Equipment listed as delivered to 3 different families that my mom couldn't find any record of actually receiving. Cole's expression didn't change. How much total? She wasn't sure. She said she'd found maybe 400,000 that she could document clearly. But she thought the actual number was bigger. A lot bigger. She said it looked like it had been going on for at least 3 years. Did she report it? Sadie's expression shifted, something that moved through her face quickly and left a residue. She tried. She went to the director first. His name is Warren Greel. He's been running Harbor Bridge for 9 years. She said the name with the specific neutrality of someone carefully not attaching the words they actually wanted to use. He told her the discrepancies were data entry errors and that she should send her concerns to their internal audit committee. She'd do that? She sent everything she had. 2 weeks later, the internal audit committee sent back a report saying they'd reviewed her concerns and found no irregularities. Sadie looked at Cole steadily. The committee chair is Greel's brother-in-law. Cole leaned back slightly in his chair. Just slightly. Okay, after that Greel started, it was different. The way people treated her at work. Her access to certain files got restricted. She'd send emails and they wouldn't get answered. She found out, through someone she trusted there, that Greel had told the board she'd been making false allegations because she was having personal problems. Sadie's jaw worked briefly. My parents split up last year. He used that. Donna made a quiet sound from the corner that wasn't quite a word. Eli had apparently finished the bottle and was now engaged in a determined attempt to remove one of her earrings. She started documenting on her own, Sadie continued, printing copies of things, saving files. She didn't keep any of it at home because she was a small hesitation. She was worried. About us. About what might happen if someone searched the house. Her eyes dropped briefly to the flash drive still in Cole's closed hand. She stored copies in different places. That drive is one of them. She made it last week. Where are the other copies? I don't know all of them. She didn't tell me everything. She said the less I knew about the locations, the better. Sadie looked up. She told me about you 3 days ago. She said she'd been watching who ate here, who paid attention, who looked like they'd seen things. She said she watched you for 2 months before she decided. Cole processed that without expression. The idea that a frightened accountant had spent 2 months conducting informal surveillance of his dinner routine was objectively unsettling. It was also, he had to admit, methodical in a way he respected. She was going to contact you herself, Sadie said. Then things changed. 2 days ago, someone broke into her car. Nothing was taken. But her work laptop bag was gone through. She could tell things had been moved. And she found out that Greel had hired a lawyer. A specific kind of lawyer. She paused, choosing words with the carefulness of someone who'd heard adults use them. The kind that files things preemptively, before you've done anything, so you look guilty first. He accused her of something. Not officially. Not yet. But she heard through her contact that he was building a case. That he was going to claim she'd been stealing from the foundation. That the flash drive, if it existed, was actually evidence she'd fabricated to cover her own theft. Sadie's voice stayed flat, but her hand on the wheel rim had gone white-knuckled. She said the story was already half written, that all he needed was for the drive to go missing, or for her to get discredited before anyone looked at it. The storm hit the building in a particular gust that made the particle board walls flex slightly, and for a second the heater's hum was swallowed by the sound of it. Cole looked at the flash drive in his hand. 3 grams. No label. The whole machinery of someone's desperate 8 months compressed into a piece of plastic and metal he could lose behind a couch cushion. Tonight, he said. Walk me through tonight specifically. She was driving us home from my physical therapy appointment. It runs late on Tuesdays, 6:30 to 8. On Route 9, somewhere near the Henderson Creek Junction, the car just stopped. She said the engine didn't give any warning. It just stopped. Sadie's voice stayed controlled, but the effort it took was visible now, showing through in the tightness around her eyes. She tried to restart it. Nothing. She tried her phone dead battery. She'd forgotten to charge it at the clinic. Couldn't see any houses, but she could see the diner sign lit up on the hill. She exhaled slowly. She gave me Eli and the drive and her wallet and told me to follow the road to the light and find you. And she stayed with the car. She said she'd flag down help. She said she'd be fine. Sadie's voice didn't waver, but something behind it did. That was 50 minutes ago. Cole stood up. Not abruptly, he didn't do anything abruptly. Hadn't since his early 20s when he'd learned that sudden movement in tight situations made everything worse. He just stood, in the way of someone who had arrived at a decision and was now organizing to execute it. "Donna," he said. Already on it, Donna said from the corner, which wasn't a response to any specific request but communicated that she understood the situation was moving into a phase that required her to be in charge of what happened in this room. She was holding Eli against her shoulder, patting his back with the rhythm of long practice. "Door stays locked. I've got the landline and my personal cell. Randy's out front. He's ex-sheriff's deputy. I'll brief him." Cole nodded. He looked at Jamie. Jamie looked back at him. 8 years old, trying very hard to have a face that said he was fine with whatever happened next. "You stay here," Cole said. "I know, Ranger stays with you." At the sound of his name, Ranger lifted his head from the door. "I need him to stay with the kids," Cole said to the dog, which was not a command. Ranger formally knew, but which he'd learned through 3 years of cohabitation with an 8-year-old in a house where Cole sometimes left at odd hours. The dog looked at Cole, then at Jamie, then appeared to conduct some internal calculation. He walked to Jamie's side and sat. Jamie put his hand on Ranger's back without being told. Cole pulled on his jacket. He looked at Sadie. "You did the right thing tonight." "You don't know that yet," she said. "You don't know if it worked." He didn't argue with her because she was right. He went to the door, unlocked it, and was 3 steps into the corridor when Sadie called after him. "Mr. Barrett," he stopped. "She said to tell you." Sadie stopped, started again. "She said to tell you that the drive is not the only copy." "That's important. The drive is not the only copy." He nodded and kept moving. The dining room had reorganized itself in the 7 minutes they'd been in the back. 3 of the highway workers had positioned themselves near the front door without anyone asking them to. The 2 families with children had moved to booths that didn't face the windows. Donna's server, a young woman named Kezia, who Cole had tipped adequately but never spoken to beyond ordering, was at the counter with the cordless phone and the focused expression of someone who had made the decision to be competent tonight. Cole stopped at the counter. "You called dispatch again?" he said quietly. "Twice," Kezia said. "They have a unit en route. ETA 12 to 15 in this weather. Deputy Salazar." "Good." He pulled a card from his wallet plain, just a name and a number, and set it on the counter. "If anyone arrives claiming to be from the Harbor Bridge Foundation, or asking about a Claire Monroe, or asking about the children in the back, that number goes to a lawyer named Price. Tell them nothing. Call that number first." Kezia picked up the card, looked at it, and put it in her apron pocket. "Got it. Anyone else come through that door, Randy eyeballs them before they get past the entrance mat." Already told him. Cole buttoned the top button of his jacket and went to the door. The cold hit him like a decision. 14 degrees, wind chill considerably lower, the kind of temperature that had opinions about exposed skin and wasn't shy about sharing them. He stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds, adjusting, letting his eyes calibrate to the dark and the white noise of the storm, and then he pushed out into it. Parking lot was a field of blown snow, tire tracks already half filled. His truck was the 3rd vehicle in the row, a 4-year-old F-250 that he kept maintained, because his life had taught him that the things you relied on in emergencies needed to be maintained before the emergency, not after. He got in, started the engine, let it run for 30 seconds, not long, but enough, and then backed out toward Route 9. The highway was emptier than usual. Not empty a pair of headlights coming north, a plow 3/4 of a mile ahead, throwing a rooster tail of ice, but thin enough that the road felt wider than it was. Cole drove at 40, which was the fastest responsible speed in these conditions, and kept his high beams on and his eyes working the shoulder. He was thinking about Ranger, not about Claire Monroe, not about Warren Greele and his convenient lawyer and his preemptive narrative, not about the flash drive in his jacket pocket, about the moment, back in the diner, when Ranger had stopped watching the children and turned to the window. Ranger was a Belgian Malinois, retired military working dog, 10 years old, with a career history that Cole had read in a file before he'd adopted him, and that had made him feel, not for the first time, that he personally had not worked nearly hard enough during his 12 years of service. The dog's particular trained skill set included explosive detection, tracking, and a protocol response discipline that the handlers called adverse stimulus discrimination, the ability to remain locked on a primary target even when secondary stimuli were designed to pull his attention. In practical terms, Ranger did not look out windows at weather. When Ranger looked out a window, it was because something specific was out there. Cole hit the Route 9 junction and turned south. High beams swept across the guardrail, the shoulder, the first dark cluster of pine beyond the drainage ditch. He drove slow. Half a mile, Sadie had said. He ticked off the distance by instinct. 12 years of operational navigation had turned his spatial memory into something that didn't need instruments. He saw the car at 6/10 of a mile, a silver 4-door passenger side toward the road, hazard lights beating their orange rhythm into the dark, pulled onto the shoulder as far as it could get without going into the ditch. He put his truck across the lane at an angle. Blocking both directions was excessive, but the visual deterrent was worth it and got out. The car was a 7-year-old Civic. Both front doors were closed. He could see, from 10 feet, that the driver's seat was empty. He went to the driver's side, tried the door unlocked. He leaned in. The key was still in the ignition, turned to accessory, which was why the hazards were still running. Physical Therapy Clinic's logo was on a folder in the back seat. A child's jacket was balled up on the floor behind the passenger seat, too small to be Sadie's. Eli stood back up. No footprints. The snow had come down hard enough and long enough to fill whatever trail Claire had left, and the wind made the shoulder into a uniform, scoured white where it hit the road, then deep drifts against the trees where it didn't. He pulled his flashlight from his jacket and swept it along the tree line south of the vehicle. Nothing. He swept north, nothing. He stood in the storm for a moment with the flashlight at his side and thought about what he knew and what he didn't. A woman sends her daughter to a diner to find a specific person she's been watching for 2 months. She has documentation of a financial crime of potentially considerable magnitude. She believes the person who committed that crime is trying to preemptively build a case against her. She stays with her car. She stays with her car. That detail had bothered him since Sadie said it, and he'd filed the feeling, and now he opened it back up. If you are a woman alone with your infant and your disabled 10-year-old and your car breaks down in a blizzard, your options are limited. Stay with the car is the survival protocol. Every driver's ed course in America says stay with the vehicle. It's sensible. But if you are that specific woman, in that specific situation, with that specific problem staying visible on the side of a highway where anyone driving past could see you felt, depending on what you believed about who was looking for you, like a gamble. Cole pulled out his phone. He called the number he'd given dispatch. The deputy answered on the second ring. Salazar. Barrett. I'm at the vehicle. Route 9 about 6/10 south of the junction. Driver's side unlocked. Key in ignition. No sign of the driver. I've got no trail in the snow. We're 8 minutes out. I'm not going anywhere. But there's a maintenance building. Used to be DOT, half-mile further south. Set back from the road about 60 yards. Still standing? A brief pause. Yeah, they haven't torn it down yet. Why? Because if I were looking for shelter off the road and out of sight, and I already knew this stretch of highway. He let the sentence end where the logic ended. Another pause, longer. I'll radio ahead. I'll start walking. Barrett, wait for. Cole pocketed the phone and started south along the shoulder with the flashlight low and his collar up against the wind. The maintenance building was where he remembered it, a cinder block structure that had probably been built in the 70s and had been deteriorating with quiet dignity ever since. The access road was gated with a chain, which someone had unhooked and left hanging open. Whether that had been recent or months ago was impossible to tell. He went through. The building had two sections, a main bay that would have housed equipment, and a smaller attached room that was probably an office or a break room. One of the main bay's roll-up doors was partially open at the bottom 6 inches, maybe 8 pushed from inside. Cole stopped outside it. He listened. Wind. The distant complaint of a loose sheet of metal on the roof. Something else. Underneath both of those, shallow and quick. The sound of someone trying to breathe quietly. Claire Monroe, he said. Not loud. Just clearly. A long silence. Then, muffled through the metal, who's there? Cole Barrett. Your daughter sent me. Another silence. Then the sound of movement uneven, one-sided, the sound of someone compensating for something, and the roll-up door ground up another 2 feet, and a woman appeared in the gap. She was mid-30s, dark-haired, jacket, half unzipped because she'd been using it as a wrap around her shoulders instead of wearing it properly. Her face was drawn tight in the way that exposure and exhaustion drew a face when it had been working hard for too long. Her right ankle was wrapped in what appeared to be the sleeve from a second layer she'd removed and torn, a makeshift compression wrap that had the specific functional ugliness of something done alone in the dark with cold fingers. She had a canvas bag over her shoulder, held against her hip with both hands. She looked at him, then past him, then at him again. Where's Sadie? Her voice was controlled barely. Diner on Route 9 North. Warm, safe, Eli's been fed. She's okay. He watched her face reorganize itself around that information. You hurt your ankle, I can walk. Okay. I fell on the embankment. She came out of the gap in the door, putting weight on the ankle and managing it with the jaw-set determination of someone who'd decided pain was not relevant to the current priorities. I couldn't stay with the car. I know you're supposed to. She stopped. You saw something. Her eyes came up to his. Headlights. On the highway about 20 minutes after Sadie left. They slowed way down when they reached my car. Just sat there, idling. For almost 3 minutes. Then they drove on. Then they pulled off onto the service road on the north side. Killed their lights. She held his gaze. I'd already started moving by then. Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called Salazar again. Change of plans. I've got her. Maintenance building, South Access Road. She's ambulatory, but she's got an ankle injury, and she's been out here about an hour. He paused. And when you get to the highway, run the service road on the north side of the Henderson Creek Junction. There may have been a vehicle sitting there with its lights off. He could hear the deputy's tone change on the other end, the shift from standard search and rescue into something else, something with more edges. Copy ETA 6 minutes. He ended the call and looked at Claire Monroe. She was watching him with the focused, calculating attention of someone trying to decide how much they just bet on a stranger. Her hands hadn't released the canvas bag. The drive is in my jacket, Cole said. You told Sadie it wasn't the only copy. It's not. Her voice was quiet but certain, in the specific way that certainty sounded when it had been built slowly and painfully rather than assumed. Whatever they do to that drive, whatever story they try to build, they can't bury all of it. How many copies? She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but the attempt was visible. Enough. Outside, beyond the tree line, Cole heard the first faint whine of a siren working its way south on Route 9. He also heard something else, further away, closer to the highway than the siren. A sound that wasn't weather and wasn't emergency services and wasn't the loose sheet of metal on the roof. The distinct crunch of footsteps on compacted snow, moving without a flashlight, coming from the direction of the North Service Road. Claire heard it at the same moment. He could tell because her hands tightened on the bag and her eyes moved to the opening behind him, and whatever careful composure she'd been maintaining for the last hour suddenly required significantly more effort to hold. Cole turned to face the dark between the trees. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't have anything to reach, for he'd come out here as a civilian, not an operator, and he'd made that call deliberately, and he stood by it, and it didn't change the fact that someone was now walking through the snow toward them without a light, in the dark, in the middle of a blizzard, having apparently followed Claire Monroe from a highway where they'd sat with their headlights off for 20 minutes. He just stood there and faced it. The footsteps stopped. 15 seconds of nothing but wind and the approaching siren. Then a voice from the trees, male, flat, the specific effectlessness of someone who had practiced sounding relaxed. Nobody needs to make this complicated. Cole said nothing. Miss Monroe, the Foundation would really like to resolve this privately. Cover the materials, settle any misunderstandings. There are sheriff's deputies about 2 minutes out, Cole said. His voice came out completely level. You should decide quickly what your next move is. Pause. Who are you? The voice said. Someone who's going to remember your voice, Cole said, and your boot size, and the specific way you've been walking on that right leg since you came off the service road. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. 2 minutes. The footsteps resumed, going back toward the highway. Cole listened to them diminish and disappear, and then he turned back to Claire Monroe, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. That's it, she said. You just talked? He didn't have much to work with, and he knew it. Cole looked in the direction the footsteps had gone. He'll be gone before Salazar gets here. You sound very sure. I've met people like that before. He didn't elaborate. Can you make it to the road? She put weight on the ankle, made a face, decided that was irrelevant. Yes, they started toward the gate. The siren was close now, the red and blue light beginning to wash through the trees in fragments, and Cole walked beside Claire Monroe through the compacted snow while she held the canvas bag against her hip and didn't ask him anything else, and he didn't offer anything, and the lights got brighter, and somewhere behind them the loose metal sheet on the roof of the maintenance building kept complaining to the wind about something neither of them had the time to listen to. He was thinking about the voice in the trees. He was thinking about the way it had stopped when he'd mentioned the boot size, the gate pattern details that meant nothing operationally, that he had no instrument to verify, that were in practical terms completely empty. But they hadn't sounded empty. They'd sounded like the opening moves of someone reading a very specific manual that the man in the trees recognized and did not want to be the subject of. He was thinking about what kind of person a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair chooses to walk half a mile through a blizzard to find. And he was thinking, with a clarity that arrived quietly and without ceremony, that whatever was on that flash drive and whatever copies existed in whatever other locations Claire Monroe had decided were sufficient had not finished being a problem. Not by a long way. The deputy's vehicle came through the gate with its lights going, and Cole raised his hand, and the night moved into its next phase. Deputy Salazar was 29 years old, 6 feet even, and had the kind of face that had not yet fully decided what it was going to look like when it grew up. He was competent. Cole had established that in the first 30 seconds of their interaction at the maintenance building, watching him move, watching him assess Claire's ankle with efficient hands and no wasted motion. He was also, Cole noted, uncomfortable. Not with Claire, not with the situation in the abstract, with Cole specifically. It showed in the way Salazar kept glancing at him sideways while he helped Claire toward the vehicle, in the slight pause before he answered Cole's questions, in the way his hand had hovered for just a moment near his radio before he'd decided against it. The deputy had run Cole's name when he was en route. Cole was sure of it, and whatever the database had returned had apparently given him something to think about. Cole didn't address it. It wasn't relevant yet. What was relevant was getting Claire Monroe into the back of the cruiser and out of the cold, which they accomplished in 4 minutes, and getting back to the diner, which took 11 more with Salazar driving carefully and Claire sitting behind the grating with the canvas bag in her lap and her eyes fixed on the road ahead with the focused blankness of someone running. Calculations, they didn't have enough data to complete. Nobody said much on the drive. Cole sat in the front passenger seat and watched the tree line and thought about boot sizes. The man in the trees had been wearing something with a hard Vibram sole. He'd heard the compression pattern in the snow, the slight squeak of the cold. Hiking boot or tactical boot, size 11 or 12 based on stride length. He'd been walking with a slight favoring of the left, which could mean an old injury or could mean nothing. He'd stopped moving. The instant, Cole had started naming observable details, which meant understood the implication. That was the part that stayed with him. Not the threat, such as it was one man in the dark who'd backed off the moment the math didn't favor him, but the immediate recognition, the way the voice had recalibrated in real time. That wasn't a process server. That wasn't a foundation administrator who'd drawn a short straw. That was someone who'd been in situations where the math changed fast and you had to change with it. The diner came into view over the hill with its orange sign blurred by blowing snow, and Salazar pulled into the lot, and Cole was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped. Not running but moving with the specific efficiency of someone who has just spent 25 minutes not knowing what was happening in the room he left behind. Randy, the ex-deputy, was at the door. He clocked Cole's approach and stepped aside without comment, which told Cole everything was fine inside. But he needed to see it himself, and he went through without breaking stride. The diner had settled into something that wasn't quite normal, but was organized. The two families had moved to adjacent booths and were doing the communal thing that strangers did in shared emergencies, a shared plate of fries, someone's kid drawing on a napkin, conversations that were studiously about everything except what was actually happening. Kezia was behind the counter with the focused calm of someone who'd decided competence was the best available response to an unusual evening. Cole went straight to the back office. Donna was in the chair with Eli asleep against her shoulder, his small fist still tangled in her collar. Jamie was on the floor with Ranger, both of them half asleep, Jamie's head against the dog's flank, Ranger's eyes open and tracking the door. Sadie was in her wheelchair with a cup of hot chocolate going cold in her hands, and she had the specific kind of awake that came from running on adrenaline past the point where the body would normally quit. When the door opened, she sat forward. Cole stepped in first. Then Claire appeared behind him in the doorway. The sound Sadie made was not a word. It was the sound a 10-year-old makes when a thing they have been holding in for approximately 90 minutes releases, all at once, the structural equivalent of a cable snapping. She was across the room, 3 hard pushes of the wheel, before Claire had finished stepping through the door, and then Claire was crouching on one knee, bad ankle and all, and they were holding on to each other with the complete, uncomplicated ferocity of people who had been very genuinely terrified of losing each other. Cole stepped back and let that be what it was. Jamie woke up when Ranger moved, and he sat up and looked around with the disoriented blink of someone who dropped off without meaning to, and he looked at Cole, and Cole gave him the nod that meant we're okay. And Jamie put his head back against the dog and closed his eyes again with the absolute trust of 8 years old. That was, Cole had learned, one of the more devastating things about having a kid. Donna carefully transferred the sleeping Eli to a blanket she'd arranged on the desk, and then she straightened up and looked at Cole with the steady eyes of a woman who had questions but understood this was not the moment for them. "We're going to need the room for a few minutes," Cole said quietly. She nodded and went to collect Jamie, who protested in a half-awake mumble and then went with her because Ranger came too, and then the door closed and it was Cole and Claire and Sadie and Eli breathing with the small, indifferent depth of an 11-month-old who had decided tonight was boring and had acted accordingly. Claire had gotten herself off the floor and into the second chair. Her ankle was wrapped in an inflatable brace that Salazar had produced from his medical kit, an upgrade from the jacket sleeve. She was holding Sadie's hand. Her other hand was on the canvas bag. "The deputy is going to need a statement," Cole said. He stayed near the door, giving them the room. "Both of you. He's good he's straight, I think. But it needs to be thorough." "I know," Claire said. "The drive." He pulled it from his jacket and held it out. She looked at it. "I need to tell you what's on it. I have a general picture. There's more than the contractor fraud." She took the drive, turned it in her fingers. 3 weeks ago, I found something in a transaction file I wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. They'd restricted my permissions, but they'd missed one directory, a legacy folder from before they restructured the file system. In it, there was a payment record. Not to a contractor. She paused. To a private consulting firm. $87,000 11 months ago. The firm is called Northfield Advisory Group. I spent 2 weeks trying to find anything publicly registered under that name and found nothing. No website, no incorporated entity, nothing in the state business registry. Cole looked at her. A shell. That's what I think. Cross-referenced the payment date with the Foundation's board minutes from that period. In the month that payment was processed, the board approved a significant expansion of the Foundation's transportation contract, a new exclusive arrangement with a company called Lakeview Mobility Services. Her voice was flat and precise, the voice of someone reciting data they'd gone over many times. I ran Lakeview Mobility Services through the same search. It's registered, it has a website, it has a physical address. But when I drove past the address last month, it's a UPS store. Consulting payment was a kickback, Cole said, for the transport contract. Probably worth considerably more than $87,000 over its full term. She held the drive up slightly. This is all on here. The contractor fraud, the shell payment, the Lakeview connection, the documents I could print, the transaction records I photographed before they locked me out. She looked at him steadily. Greal didn't build this by himself. The board contract approval was unanimous. That means at least some board members either knew or were incentivized not to look closely. Cole was quiet for a moment. How many copies? He asked again. She almost smiled. Same as before, not quite making it. 4 total now. The drive. A duplicate I gave to a former colleague in the state's nonprofit oversight office. 3 days ago, she hasn't opened it yet. I told her to hold it. Printed file set in a safety deposit box at Millhaven Savings, and a cloud backup behind a password that's in a sealed envelope at my lawyer's office. She paused. My lawyer isn't in Millhaven. She's 2 counties over. I've been her client for a year. Cole said, You've been planning this for a while, since the internal audit came back clean. Her jaw set slightly. I knew then that it wasn't going to be fixable from inside. I just needed enough time to make sure that when I moved, they couldn't bury it. Tonight wasn't your timeline. Tonight was not my timeline. She looked at her ankle. Car didn't break down by accident. I don't know how they did it. I'm not mechanical, but I drove that route this morning with no problems, and at 8:15 it stopped dead in the middle of a highway in a blizzard. She looked back up at Cole. That's why I kept Sadie moving toward the diner instead of flagging down passing cars. I didn't know who was passing. Sadie had been quiet through all of this, sitting beside her mother with her hand still in Claire's. She wasn't performing quiet, she was actually processing. Cole watched her face and recognized the specific internal activity of a person filing things, organizing them, building a picture. The man tonight, Sadie said. At the building. Claire looked at her. What man? There was someone in the trees, Cole said. He left when the deputy arrived. Claire's face went through several things in quick succession. Did nobody got hurt? He backed off. Cole didn't elaborate on why. But it confirmed someone was watching your car, which means someone knew you'd broken down, and they responded fast enough to get a person on foot into the trees behind that building before I arrived. The room was quiet. Eli made a small sound in his sleep and didn't wake up. That's a lot of infrastructure, Claire said quietly, for a nonprofit director. Yes, Cole said is. He let that observation do its own work. Because the implication of it, the thing it pointed toward, the possibility that what Claire had documented was the surface layer of something larger and more organized, was not a conclusion he was going to push tonight. In a 10 by 12 back office with a tired woman and a frightened child and a deputy in the parking lot who was going to need statements and whose comfort level with Cole Barrett was already uncertain. That was a problem for the people whose specific job it was. His job tonight had been narrower. He went to the door. I'm going to send Salazar in. Tell him everything. Show him the drive. He looked at Sadie, both of you. Everything. Sadie looked up at him. You're leaving? I'm going to be 20 feet away. He opened the door. Ranger will come back in. He said the last part to Sadie specifically because he'd noticed over the last 90 minutes that the girl interacted with the dog with a particular ease that she didn't extend to most of the adults in the room. He didn't know if she'd had a dog before or if she was just someone who found animals less complicated than people during emergencies. Either way, it was a useful fact. He stepped out and found Salazar in the corridor, talking quietly into his radio. The deputy looked up when Cole came out and ended the transmission. "They're ready to give their statements," Cole said. "The woman has documentation. A flash drive and a physical record set she can describe locations for. Going to get bigger than a missing person call, deputy." Salazar looked at him with that sideways calculation he'd been doing all night. "You want to tell me who you actually are? I'm a resident of Millhaven who ate dinner here tonight and got involved in something he didn't expect. You ran the plates on that service road. I mentioned the service road. You ran the plates. Came back to a fleet vehicle registered to a property management company in the city. Company incorporated 18 months ago." Salazar's jaw worked slightly. "Same window as when Harbor Bridge started the contract restructuring, according to what she just told me in the car." Cole looked at him for a moment. "You were listening. I'm a deputy, not a wall." Salazar said it without apology. "I know what Harbor Bridge is. My cousin has a kid who uses their transport services." He paused. "Used. Past tense. Service quality dropped significantly about a year ago. Nobody could figure out why." The corridor was quiet enough that Cole could hear the soft rhythm of Eli breathing through the closed door. "Go take their statements," Cole said. "Be thorough. She's organized, she'll give you clean information. And when you file tonight, make sure it routes to someone above your department's chain. This has a board component." Salazar looked at him steadily. "You're going to tell me what your background is, or I'm going to have to figure it out on my own." "Navy," Cole said. 12 years. Various assignments." He held the deputy's gaze. "I've been out for 4 years. I eat here on Tuesdays." That's the current situation. Salazar studied him for another 3 seconds, decided that was everything he was going to get tonight, and went into the office. Cole walked back out to the dining room. The night had reached the hour where it would normally be winding down, tables clearing, coffee going untouched, the particular exhaustion of a Tuesday that had run too long. But the room was still configured for a situation in progress. The highway workers still at the entrance, the 2 families still occupying adjacent booths, Kiziza behind the counter with the alertness of someone who hadn't decided it was over yet. Cole sat at the counter. Donna put a mug in front of him without asking. He wrapped his hands around it and let the heat work through his palms. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number," he answered. "Mr. Barrett." The voice was male, measured, with the careful diction of someone who'd practiced being calm. "My name is Gerald Price. I'm the legal representative for Harbor Bridge Foundation and its director, Warren Greel. I understand you've become involved in a rather complicated situation this evening." Cole said nothing. "I want to be very clear that Harbor Bridge is an institution with a strong record of community service, and that the materials Miss Monroe has been circulating represent a deeply incomplete and misleading picture of the Foundation's finances. She's been under considerable personal stress." "How did you get this number?" Cole said. A brief pause. "I'm sorry, my number, this phone. How did you get it?" Another pause, slightly longer. "I have access to various. This is a phone registered to a post office box through a third-party account," Cole said. He kept his voice completely flat. "It's not connected to my name in any public database. Getting this number required either illegal access to telecommunications records or physical access to someone who knows me." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "So I'm going to ask you one more time. How did you get this number?" The measured calm on the other end developed a hairline fracture. "Mr. Barrett, I'm trying to have a productive. I'm going to give this number to the deputy who's currently taking statements in the next room," Cole said. "He can have his department trace the origin of this call. That process is going to take approximately 6 hours and is going to reveal things that are probably not useful for your client." He paused. "Or you can tell me how you got it right now, and I'll decide whether the trace is still necessary." A long silence. long enough that Cole could hear. Beneath it, so the ambient sound of an office, an air conditioning unit, the distant click of a keyboard. Contact, the lawyer finally said. A contact recognized you from the diner. Someone in the diner. I can't verify the specific. Cole ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand and looked at the room. 18 people. 3 highway workers who'd become informal security. 2 families. Kezia, Randy, Donna. The cook in the back whose name he didn't know. Couple who'd come in at 9 and had been quietly eating in the far corner and had not involved themselves in anything. He looked at the couple in the corner. The man was mid-40s, unremarkable in every way that someone trying to be unremarkable could manage. Dark jacket, no distinguishing features at conversational distance, a phone face down on the table that he wasn't using. He'd been nursing the same cup of coffee since Cole had come back from the highway. He was looking at his plate, and he was looking at it with the specific fixed attention of someone who was concentrating on looking at their plate. Cole turned back to the counter. He picked up his coffee. He took a slow drink. Over the rim of the mug, he spoke quietly to Kezia, who was close enough to hear without him raising his voice. Couple in the far corner. When did they come in? Kezia didn't look. She was good at not looking. About 9:15, maybe 9:20. Before or after the deputy arrived. A brief pause while she thought back after. 10 minutes after, I think. They come in through the front? Yes. Did Randy check them? Another pause. Longer. He waved them through. I think he thought the situation was settled by then. Cole set the mug down. I need you to do something for me. Go to the office, knock twice. Tell Deputy Salazar there's a situation in the dining room. Don't say anything else. Don't look at the corner table on your way back. Kezia's expression didn't change in any visible way, but she was already moving. Cole didn't turn around. He sat at the counter and watched the reflection in the steel panel behind the coffee machine, distorted, curved, but functional, and in it he could see. The man in the corner had finally stopped looking at his plate. He was looking at Cole's back. His right hand was below the table. Cole set a $10 bill on the counter for the coffee he'd barely touched, and he stood up, and he turned around, and he walked toward the corner table at the pace of someone who had nowhere in particular to be and nothing in particular on his mind. The man's jaw tightened by a degree. The woman beside him, younger, mid-30s, brunette, the careful blankness of someone who'd been told to maintain a specific expression and was maintaining it, didn't move at all. Cole stopped at the table. Evening, he said. The man looked up at him. Close up. He had the kind of eyes that had done some things they didn't talk about at dinner parties. Not hostile, not warm, just flat and measuring. Cole had seen those eyes in mirrors for most of his 30s. He recognized the calibration. Evening, the man says. Cole pulled out the chair across from them and sat down without being invited. The man's jaw worked. The woman's hands appeared on the table, both of them, flat on the surface, which could be a gesture of openness or could be the result of the same training Cole had received at 23, that said hands visible and flat was the safest position when a situation was unresolved. Gerald Price called me 10 minutes ago, Cole said. Someone in this diner gave him my phone number. My phone isn't registered in my name. He looked at the man. You want to tell me how this evening goes from here, or should we wait for the deputy? The man was quiet for a moment. He had the stillness of someone who'd been in rooms like this before, not this room specifically, but the metaphorical room where the options narrowed and you had to pick one fast. We're not here to do anything, the man said. His voice was low and even. We're here to observe and report. That's the full scope. Observe and report to Gerald Price, to our employer. Who is your employer? The man said nothing. I'm going to take that as Northfield Advisory Group, Cole said. That landed. He could see it, a micro-expression, half a second, something moving behind those flat eyes that wasn't quite surprise but was in its neighborhood. He filed the reaction. You know the problem with observe and report, Cole said, leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table, voice dropping further, is that you've already completed the first half. You observed. And then you provided my phone number to a lawyer who called me to apply pressure to a witness in an ongoing law enforcement situation. He looked at the man steadily. That's not observe and report anymore. That's obstruction. The woman's fingers pressed slightly harder against the tabletop. The deputy is going to come out that hallway in about 90 seconds, Cole said. When he does, you're going to have a choice about whether this conversation happened here voluntarily or officially. I'd suggest thinking about that quickly. He stood up. He walked back to the counter, sat down, and turned so his back was not to the room. 40 seconds later, Salazar came through the hallway door, and Cole tilted his head almost imperceptibly toward the corner table, and Salazar, who was apparently more perceptive than his face generally advertised, changed his trajectory without breaking stride and headed for the couple in the corner. The man put both hands on the table when he saw the deputy coming. The woman looked at the wall. Cole exhaled through his nose, picked up his mostly empty coffee mug, and looked at the front door, and the rain-dark window beside it, and the black highway beyond, and he thought about the fact that it was 11:40 on a Tuesday night, and he had an 8-year-old asleep in a back office, and a retired military dog who needed to go outside, and a truck in the parking lot that hadn't moved in 3 hours. He thought about the flash drive in the deputy's hands now, and the safety deposit box 2 counties over, and a sealed envelope in a lawyer's office that nobody had opened yet. He thought about Sadie rolling half a mile through a blizzard with her baby brother in her arms, because she'd decided, at 10 years old, that she was the one who had to do something, and she'd picked the one person she thought might actually help, and she'd been right, which was the kind of luck that only worked out that specific way, because the person doing the picking had done the math correctly under conditions that would have paralyzed most adults. He thought about what Claire had said, that she'd watched him for 2 months, that she'd made a decision based on observation and assessment and a judgment call that was, when he examined the logic, more rigorous than most formal background checks. He thought about what a 10-year-old watching her mother make that decision must have learned from it. Donna appeared at his elbow with the coffee pot. "You eat anything?" she said. "Hours ago. You want something?" He thought about it. "Whatever's hot." She nodded and went to the window and said something to the cook that Cole didn't hear, and then she came back and put both her hands flat on the counter and looked at him with the direct, no decorations expression of a woman who had run a roadside diner for 22 years and had a reliable instinct for the shape of things. "Is it over?" she said. "Or is it just in a different part?" Cole considered the question seriously, because it deserved to be considered seriously. "It's in a different part," he said. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "Then you'd better eat." He did. Behind him, Salazar had the couple from the corner separated, man at one table, woman at the other, and was talking to them in the low, steady voice of someone who had decided that a Tuesday night observation assignment had just become significantly more complicated, and who was managing that complication the way competent people managed unexpected complications, one careful step at a time. The cooks slid a plate through the window, something with eggs and toast and a piece of whatever had been on the grill. It was not elegant. It was hot, and it was real, and Cole ate it with the focused, unsentimental efficiency of someone who understood that you ate when you could because you didn't always know when the next window would open. Storm outside had not quieted. The highway was empty past the lot's edge, the orange sign up on the hill still throwing its light into the dark, and somewhere in the city, Warren Greel was asleep or awake, and either knew what had happened tonight or didn't yet, and in the morning, that was going to become a different kind of problem entirely. But that was morning. Tonight, the children were safe, the documentation was in official hands, and the man who'd walked through the snow toward a darkened building had made the correct calculation about whether to keep walking. Cole finished the eggs. He put his fork down. He sat there for a moment, in the orange light of a diner at midnight, with the sound of the storm against the glass and the low voices of a deputy doing his job in the background, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a while, not satisfaction, exactly, which was a clean feeling he'd learned to distrust, but something adjacent to it. the specific weight of a night that had asked something real of him, and to which he had, more or less, given an adequate answer. Ranger appeared from the hallway and put his head on Cole's knee. Cole put his hand on the dog's ear and didn't say anything. The night held. The plate was empty, and the coffee was cold by the time Sheriff's Detective Lena Marsh walked through the diner's front door at 12:47 in the morning. Cole saw her before she saw him, which gave him approximately 4 seconds to assess, mid-50s compact, wearing a civilian jacket over what looked like clothes she'd put on in a hurry, dark slacks, sweater that didn't match, boots that did. She had the face of someone who'd been woken up and had decided to be functional about it rather than resentful. Her eyes swept the room once, the way experienced law enforcement swept rooms, not dramatically, but with a quiet completeness that didn't miss the deputy at the corner tables or the couple being separately interviewed, or Cole at the counter. Came to Cole first. "Barrett," she said. Not a question. "Detective." She pulled out the stool beside him and sat, didn't take off her jacket, looked at Salazar across the room, then back at Cole. "He says you talked a man out of the trees." The man made his own decision. Salazar's version is more interesting than that. She studied him with the particular patience of someone who did this for a living and had learned that silence was a more reliable extraction tool than questions. "He says you gave the man a gait analysis in the dark at 30 feet. I gave him information. He decided what to do with it." "What kind of information?" Cole looked at her, the kind that suggested a more detailed observation had occurred than the man was comfortable with. Marsh was quiet for a moment. Outside, the storm was doing something new, not louder, but lower, the sound of wind that had dropped from a scream to a sustained push, which in Cole's experience usually meant it was preparing for something specific. "Salazar ran your name," she said. "What came back was interesting." "What came back?" "A lot of redacted blocks and a note from a Fort Bragg administrator telling anyone who asked to route inquiries through a specific JAG office." She held his gaze. "That's not standard Navy." "I had some attached assignments," Cole said. "Attached assignments." She repeated the phrase with the flatness of someone who understood exactly what it meant and was giving him the opportunity to say more or not. He didn't. She nodded slightly. "Okay, that's your business." She turned to look at the room, at Salazar, and the two people from the corner table, and the general organized residue of a night that had been more complicated than anyone had planned. "My business is the Monroe situation, which I've been following at a distance for about 6 weeks." Cole looked at her. "She wasn't the first person to raise concerns about Harbor Bridge," Marsh said. She said it quietly, not looking at him. "There was a case manager 18 months ago. Left the foundation under what were described as performance issues. She filed an informal complaint with the city's nonprofit oversight board, which bounced it to an advisory committee, which found insufficient basis for further review, and closed it in 60 days. She paused. "The advisory committee chair is on the Harbor Bridge Board. Different chair than the internal audit chair. Same person." Marsh looked at him then. "You've been paying attention. Claire Monroe is thorough. She briefed me. She briefed you." Marsh seemed to be deciding how she felt about that. She gave a statement to Salazar. "I read it in the car on the way here. The documentation, she's describing the contractor invoices, the Northfield payment, the Lakeview transport contract. If it holds up to independent review, we're looking at something considerably more organized than one director skimming a charity. That's what it looks like. It also means the people trying to suppress it are operating with resources that go beyond a single nonprofit's legal budget." She nodded toward the corner tables. "Those two." The man gave Salazar a business card for a security consulting firm. Wouldn't name the client. The firm itself is Real Incorporated, 3 years ago, licensed in 4 states. But when Salazar ran the principals, 2 of them have prior federal contractor backgrounds with gaps in their employment history that look familiar. Cole said nothing. "You recognize the pattern," Marsh said. "It's a recognizable pattern. So we have a nonprofit director who may be running fraudulent contractor payments and transport kickbacks connected through a shell company to a security consulting firm with federal contract backgrounds, who placed personnel inside a diner at midnight during a snowstorm to observe a witness. She said all of this with the careful precision of someone building a visible structure so they could examine its load-bearing walls. That's not a charity governance problem. No, Cole said. It's not. She was quiet for a moment. The man in the trees, you said he had a gait abnormality in his right leg. Left. Left. You heard that in the snow. Snow compresses differently depending on where the weight is. On the left, his footfall was harder, deeper. Whatever the injury is, it's old, he's compensated for it. It doesn't slow him down, but he hasn't fully corrected the weight distribution. Marsh looked at him for a long time. You got all of that in the dark. It's quiet out here, Barrett. She said his name with the tone of someone who'd finished deciding something. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to understand I'm not asking it officially. He waited. The person who was at that maintenance building tonight, and the people in those corner seats, they're not the end of this. They're the part that was willing to be visible. She held his gaze. Whoever constructed this arrangement, the shell company, the security contract, the preemptive legal positioning, the car that conveniently broke down, they have access and resources that are going to make the next 30 days considerably complicated. Claire Monroe is going to need people around her who understand what that level of opposition looks like. Cole said nothing. I'm not asking you to do anything, Marsh said. I'm telling you what the situation is. I understand the situation. Good. She stood up from the stool and buttoned her jacket. I'm going to go talk to the Monroe family, and then I'm going to go back to the office and make some calls that are going to ruin several people's mornings. She paused. You staying? Until the family has transportation. She nodded, like that was the answer she'd expected, and she went down the hallway toward the back office. Cole turned back to the counter. Kezia appeared from somewhere and refilled his coffee without asking, which at nearly 1 in the morning felt like a genuine act of consideration. He wrapped his hands around the mug and looked at the front window and the dark beyond it and did not think about the next 30 days. Because there was a practiced discipline to not thinking about the thing that was coming before it arrived, and he had built that discipline carefully over many years, and tonight was not the night to let it slip. Salazar came to the counter 20 minutes later and sat where Marsh had been sitting and looked like he'd aged slightly since the beginning of the evening, in the specific way that complicated cases aged people. Couple from the corner, he said. Man is named Decker. Woman is named Holt. They're declining to discuss their client or their assignment beyond what's on the business card. They haven't broken any laws tonight that I can make stick right now. Providing a phone number to a lawyer isn't obstruction in a way I can prove without more. I know, Cole said. I'm running the vehicle they came in. It's in the lot a gray Tahoe. Salazar looked at his notebook. Registered to a fleet management company in the city. Same one as the service road vehicle. Same parent entity as Northfield Advisory, probably, Cole said. It'll take some digging. Yeah. Salazar was quiet for a moment. You told me you were just a guy who ate here on Tuesdays. That's accurate. You also apparently gave a hostile contact a detailed biometric read in the dark, talked down a potential confrontation with no backup and no weapon, correctly identified an organizational relationship between a shell company and a security firm, and got a detective I've never seen come out at 1 in the morning out of her house at 1 in the morning. Salazar looked at him sideways. On Tuesdays. Cole looked at his coffee. I've been out for 4 years, he said. I have a son. I run a property maintenance business. I have a dog that needs medication every 12 hours for a thyroid condition. He looked at Salazar. I'm not anything interesting, deputy. I'm just someone who paid attention tonight. Salazar seemed to decide that was all he was getting. The Monroe family is going to need transport and somewhere to stay. Their house isn't a good option tonight, Cole said. That's what Detective Marsh said. Salazar rubbed the back of his neck. We don't have a formal victim relocation program that I can activate at 1 in the morning. I have a house with 2 spare bedrooms, Cole said. Claire Monroe can decide whether that's acceptable. Salazar looked at him. You're offering to put up a woman and 2 kids you met 3 hours ago. I'm offering to provide a secure location that isn't their home address while the situation is assessed in daylight. Cole paused. That's all it is. Salazar nodded slowly, with the look of a man who understood that the easiest thing right now was to accept a practical solution and examine its implications later. I'll tell Detective Marsh. He went back down the hallway. Cole sat. Ranger had come out of the hallway at some point and was now lying on the floor beside the counter stool, his chin on his forepaws, his eyes moving between Cole and the front door with the patient, untroubled attention of an animal that understood the situation, was in a holding pattern, and was comfortable with that. 1:20. The back office produced a small cluster of people that reorganized the diner's geometry. Marsh, Salazar, Claire Monroe in the rolling chair Donna had found for her, the inflatable ankle brace visible below her slacks, and Sadie, who was pushing her wheelchair herself, with Eli asleep across her lap, in a way that should not have been ergonomically functional, but appeared to be working fine. Donna came behind them with a diaper bag that Cole hadn't seen before, which meant she'd either found it in the office or produced it from somewhere personal, and he chose not to examine that too closely. Jamie was still asleep in the office. Apparently, Ranger stood up immediately when the group appeared and went to Sadie's side without being called. Claire Monroe looked different in the diner's full light than she had at the maintenance building. Part of that was warmth and the hour of shelter. Her color had come back, and the specific drawn-tight look of exposure was gone. But mostly, she looked like someone who had held a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just, within the last hour, been allowed to set it down. Not let it go. Just set it down and flex her hands and feel how tired they were. She stopped in front of Cole. "Detective Marsh told me what you're offering," she said. "It's temporary, until you can make a proper plan in daylight with your lawyer. I know what it is." She looked at him without any of the careful assessment from earlier. Because she was past that now, the energy for it gone. Why? Cole thought about that, because it was a genuine question and deserved a genuine answer. Because your daughter walked half a mile in a blizzard and did everything right, and I'd like that to not be wasted. Claire Monroe looked at him for a moment. Beside her, Sadie was watching them both with dark eyes that processed things at a speed that Cole had stopped underestimating approximately 6 hours ago. "Okay," Claire said. It took 30 minutes to organize the logistics. Salazar would follow them to Cole's house and do a visual clearance of the perimeter. Cole had not asked for this. And Salazar had not explained it, but it happened, which told Cole the deputy was either more plugged into the evening's implications than he'd let on, or simply cautious in a way that Cole respected. Marsh stayed at the diner with Decker and Holt, who were apparently willing to extend their conversation, now that the detective was personally present. Donna refused payment for anything that had happened in the back office, which Cole didn't argue with. He collected Jamie from the office, which involved carrying him, because the boy had gone deep under, in the way that only 8-year-olds could manage in uncomfortable rooms, and Jamie surfaced only far enough to confirm Cole was the person doing the carrying, and then went back down without comment. They went in 2 vehicles, Cole's truck, with Jamie in the back seat and Ranger in the cargo area, and Salazar's cruiser, with Claire, the kids, and the drive to Cole's house, took 12 minutes on roads that were better than they'd been an hour ago. His house was a gray Cape Cod on the north side of Millhaven, 4 blocks off the lake, that he'd bought 14 months ago because the price was honest and the furnace worked, and there was a fenced yard that Ranger needed. It was not a particularly comfortable house in the aesthetic sense. He hadn't done much to it beyond functional, but it was warm, and the spare bedrooms had beds in them, and at 2 in the morning those were the relevant criteria. Salazar walked the perimeter, checked the attached garage, came in and looked at the basement stairs with the expression of someone covering bases, and then said he'd be back in daylight and left. Claire stood in Cole's kitchen and looked at it. The way people looked at unfamiliar rooms at 2 in the morning, not evaluating it, just mapping it, the way the mind did automatically when it was deciding whether a place was safe. "There's food if anyone needs anything," Cole said. "The spare rooms are upstairs, both on the left. The bed in the first one is bigger." He looked at Eli, who was somehow still asleep despite being transferred between approximately 7 sets of arms over the course of the evening. "There's a pack and play in the closet. It was Jamie's, but the frame's still good." Claire turned to look at him. You kept it. I kept a lot of things I probably should have cleared out. He said it without elaboration. Sadie had navigated to the kitchen doorway and was examining the house with the specific assessment of someone calibrating its accessibility doorway widths, floor surfaces, the threshold into the kitchen. The downstairs bathroom had a wider door than standard, because the previous owners had done a modification which he knew she'd find in approximately 3 minutes. The downstairs bathroom should work for you, he said. The door's 36 inches. She looked at him. You measured your bathroom door. I looked it up when I bought the place. It was on the disclosure sheet. She studied him with the expression that he was coming to understand was her default operating mode, not skeptical exactly, more like rigorous, the face of someone who required evidence before filing things as true. Then she nodded slightly, the specific nod that meant the information had been received and would be acted on. Cole set up the pack and play while Claire got Eli settled, which took longer than expected because Eli, apparently sensing that a comfortable surface was being offered, decided this was the moment to wake up and conduct a thorough investigation of his surroundings. He was eventually persuaded back to sleep by methods Cole didn't observe because he gave them the room. He stood in the hallway outside the spare bedroom with his back against the wall and his arms crossed and thought about nothing specific, which was a skill he'd developed during extended operations when there was nothing actionable to think about, and thinking about things anyway was just burning fuel. At some point, Jamie appeared in the hallway in his socks, blinking. Dad, go back to sleep. Is everyone okay? Cole looked at his son, 8 years old, dark-haired, still with the soft, unfinished face of a child that sometimes struck him at odd angles when he wasn't expecting it, the evidence of time passing in a form that didn't feel abstract. Yeah, everyone's okay. Who are they? People who needed a place to be tonight. Jamie processed this with the moral simplicity of someone who hadn't yet developed the adult habit of finding reasons why things were complicated. Okay, he said, and went back to his room. Cole went downstairs, made sure the doors were locked, checked the window latches from habit, and sat in the kitchen with the overhead light on low and his phone on the table. At 3:15, his phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he recognized, one of a small list of numbers he kept in a separate contacts group that had no names attached to it, just codes. The code on this one was a 2-letter identifier that he associated with a specific person he'd worked alongside for approximately 14 months in a context that he did not discuss at dinner parties or anywhere else. Text said, "Saw your name in a routing from Millhaven SD. You okay?" He typed back, "Fine. Complicated evening. Nothing active." The response came in 40 seconds. Northfield Advisory is a known entity. Flag it if it escalates. He stared at that for a moment. Then he typed, "How known?" The response took longer this time, almost 2 minutes. Then, known enough that someone will be interested that it surfaced in a county fraud case. Sit tight. He put the phone face down on the table. He sat with that for a while. Outside, the storm had finally made its decision. It was snowing again. Not the hard sideways assault of earlier, but a quieter, vertical fall that the kitchen window turned into something almost unremarkable. Normal winter weather, the kind of snow that fell on small cities without commentary. He thought about Claire Monroe's voice when she'd described the Northfield payment, $87,000, 11 months ago. She'd said it with the precision of someone who'd read that number so many times it had lost its shape as a dollar amount and become simply a data point, a piece of architecture in the structure she'd been building. He thought about the man in the trees, the flat measured voice, the instant recalculation when the math shifted. He thought about a security consulting firm with federal contractor gaps in its principal's histories, and a routing message that arrived less than 2 hours after his name appeared in a county sheriff's department filing, and a 2-letter code that didn't have a name attached to it, because some things were organized that way, for reasons that were sensible and that he had decided 4 years ago to leave behind. He picked up his phone and typed one more message, "What do you need from me?" The response was immediate this time, "Nothing yet. Stay available." He put the phone down and looked at the falling snow. 6 in the morning, Cole heard movement upstairs, the soft, careful movement of someone trying not to wake a sleeping house, and 20 minutes later, Claire Monroe appeared in the kitchen doorway in the same clothes as the night before. Her hair tied back, the inflatable brace on her ankle, moving with the compensating gait of someone who'd slept on the injury and was reintroducing themselves to its demands. She stopped when she saw him at the table. "You been down here all night?" she said. "Mostly." She came in, looked at the coffee maker with the evaluating eye of someone who needed coffee, and was doing the math of whether asking was appropriate. Stood, filled it, and started it without comment, and she sat in the chair across from his. They sat in the quiet of the kitchen while the coffee brewed, and outside the snow was still falling. And from upstairs came the small shuffling sound of Eli, deciding it was morning. "Gerald Price called you," she said, "at midnight. What did he say?" "The standard version. Misunderstanding, personal stress, incomplete picture." Cole looked at her. He knew my phone number. Someone in the diner gave it to him. Claire's jaw set. "Decker. That's my read. I should have expected that. I knew they'd have someone positioned." She pressed her fingers against the table surface. "I've been 2 steps behind them since September. You've been documenting a fraud while working full-time and raising 2 kids, Cole said. "You're not 2 steps behind. You just didn't have the same resources." She looked at him across the table. "What are your resources exactly?" He was quiet for a moment. "At the moment, a truck, a dog, and a house in Millhaven." "That's not a complete answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She held his gaze with the directness of someone who'd spent 8 months learning not to accept incomplete answers because incomplete answers had a cost. "The person in the trees last night, you weren't afraid of him." I've been in situations where being afraid wasn't the most useful available response. That's a very careful way of saying something. It's an accurate way. She was quiet. The coffee maker finished with a sound like a punctuation mark. Cole stood and got 2 mugs and poured without asking, because it was 6 in the morning and some negotiations were beneath the level of courtesy and just needed to happen. He set one in front of her and sat back down. "Northfield Advisory," he said. "Has anyone else you know connected that name to anything?" She wrapped both hands around the mug. "I've told 3 people about the Northfield payment. You, Detective Marsh, and my lawyer." "Why?" "I have a contact who recognized the name when I described the situation." He watched her face process that. It may be a larger entity than a local kickback vehicle. She was very still. "How much larger?" "I don't know yet." He said it plainly because she'd earned plainness. "But if it is, it changes the complexity of the next few weeks for you and your family." Meaning the documentation you've collected is more valuable than a fraud case. And the people trying to suppress it will know that, and the resources they'll apply will scale accordingly. He held her gaze. "And it means there are people on the other side of this government people who may have an interest in how it resolves." Claire Monroe looked at her coffee. She looked at it for a long time. "I'm an accountant," she said finally. "I found a discrepancy in a nonprofit's books, and I followed it because it was the right thing to do, and because the families those funds were supposed to help are real people who didn't get what they needed." Her voice was flat and controlled, but something underneath it had an edge that was not quite anger and not quite fear, and was probably both of them compressed into something functional. I didn't sign up for something that involves federal contractors and government contacts." "I know, do you?" "Yes." He said it simply, not to reassure her, but because it was true. "And none of that changes what you found or what it means for the families. The complexity around it doesn't cancel the core of it." She was quiet. "The documentation you have is clean," he said. "You built it right, multiple copies, independent locations, a lawyer who's not local, a contact at the oversight office. Whatever Greel and his lawyer try to construct, they're building on sand because you didn't leave them a single point of failure." He paused. "That was smart. You were smart about this before you had any reason to know how smart you needed to be." She looked up at him. The edge in her voice when she spoke had shifted into something he couldn't immediately name. "Sadie was the one who pushed me to keep going. When the internal audit came back clean and I was ready to walk away and file a complaint somewhere and call it done, She stopped. Started again. She was 8 at the time. She said, "Mom, if the people who are supposed to check didn't check, then you have to be the one who checks." Claire's mouth pressed together briefly. From an 8-year-old. Cole thought about Sadie in the diner, scanning the room in controlled intervals, tracking the door, negotiating the handoff of her brother with the precision of someone running an operation. She didn't stop being that person, he said no. Claire exhaled. She did not. Upstairs, Eli's sounds had upgraded from shuffling to something more assertive, and a moment later Sadie's voice was audible, low and even, the particular register of someone talking to a baby who needed to understand that it was early and some patience was required. Cole stood and poured himself more coffee. "Detective Marsh is going to want to talk to you again today," he said, more formally than last night. "I know. Your lawyer should be on the phone before that meeting. I'll call her at 8. Claire looked at her own mug. "What about Greel? What happens to him today?" "That depends on how fast Marsh moves and what the documentation review shows. If the copies hold up the way you say they do, there's a case. How fast it moves through the system is a different question. He's going to try to file preemptively. Price was already building toward that before last night." "Yes, but last night changed his timeline." Cole looked at her. He had people in a diner at midnight in a blizzard to observe and report. That's now in a deputy's field notes and a detective's case file. Whatever story Price was going to build about Claire Monroe fabricating document, it got complicated the moment those two people sat down in that corner. She absorbed that. They can still say I fabricated everything. They can try. But your daughter walked half a mile through a blizzard to deliver a flash drive, and a man ran from a building when a county deputy arrived, and 2 people from a security consulting firm were caught in the same location as the woman they were supposedly not following. He looked at her directly. Stories that require that many moving parts to work usually don't. Claire Monroe looked at him across the kitchen table. In the gray morning light with snow coming down outside and her daughter's voice carrying softly from upstairs, and he watched something on her face do the thing that faces did when the thing they'd been carrying was confirmed to be actually, finally, transferring to other hands. Not relief. Something before relief. The first moment you believe relief is possible. "I need to call my lawyer," she said. "Use the landline. It's on the wall." He stood up. "I'll start breakfast." She looked at the landline, then at him. "Why the landline?" "Because it's not registered to either of us, and it's attached to a physical address that's already in a county sheriff's database as a location of interest tonight." He pulled eggs from the refrigerator. "Anyone monitoring your cell is going to have a harder time with it." She stared at him for a moment. "You think about things like that." "Habit," he said, and cracked the first egg. She went to the landline. He listened to her dial, not to the conversation, which was none of his business, but to the fact of it, the sound of a woman who had been operating alone for 8 months, finally making the call that meant she wasn't anymore. At 7:30, Salazar's cruiser appeared at the end of the street. Cole watched it from the kitchen window while he flipped toast and didn't comment on its arrival. At 7:45, a second vehicle appeared behind it unmarked, county plates, which meant Marsh had decided morning came early today. 8 o'clock, Cole's phone buzzed with a text from the code number, Northfield Advisory. 9 known contracts. One of the principals is going to have a bad morning when Millhaven SD files their paperwork. Stand by. He read it once, put the phone face down, and called everyone to breakfast. Jamie came downstairs in mismatched socks and accepted the situation of having house guests with the practical adaptability of a child who'd learned that his father's life occasionally required flexibility. He sat next to Sadie at the kitchen table and handed her the butter without being asked, and she took it without comment, and they ate toast in the easy silence of 2 people who had mutually decided the other one was probably fine. Eli sat in a mixing bowl. Cole had lined with a folded blanket a configuration of uncertain structural integrity that Eli apparently found satisfactory, and ate a piece of toast with the focused, destructive enthusiasm of someone who had not yet grasped the concept of table manners. Ranger sat under the table and received, from multiple directions, small pieces of toast crust with the dignified patience of someone who had learned not to appear too eager. Cole stood at the counter with his coffee and watched it. The front door would open in about 20 minutes, and Detective Marsh would come in, and the morning would become the kind of morning that had lawyers and statements and official processes. And at some point in the next few days, someone was going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with Warren Greele. And at some point after that, a man named Price was going to discover that the preemptive narrative he'd been constructing had been overtaken by actual events. And somewhere in a building Cole didn't know about, a person he used to work alongside was making phone calls about Northfield Advisory Group that were going to complicate mornings in offices considerably further away than Millhaven. He thought about Sadie, rolling through a blizzard with her brother in her arms. He thought about the weight of a flash drive in his closed fist. He thought about Claire saying she watches me for 2 months, not suspicious, not strange, just practical, the assessment of a woman who had learned the hard way that the world was not organized to protect her and had adapted accordingly. He thought about what it cost, specifically to be right and ignored for 8 months. The specific arithmetic of that. The toast was burning slightly. He flipped it without looking, put it on a plate, and brought it to the table. "Move over," he said to Jamie, who was taking up more than his statistical share of the bench, and Jamie moved, and Cole sat down and picked up his coffee, and outside the snow was still falling, quiet and vertical and without opinion, and inside the kitchen was warm and full of the specific noise of a morning that had been earned the hard way. He was not thinking about what came next. He was thinking about right now, which was a thing he'd learned to do, deliberately and with effort, on a night a long time ago when someone had told him that the future was the enemy of the present, and the present was the only place anything real happened. Right now was fine. Right now was enough. The front door would open when it opened. Cole was still at the counter when his phone buzzed again at 4:50 in the morning. Not the code number this time. "Marsh?" He answered before the second buzz. "Barrett. Greele just called Price." Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who'd been awake long enough that tired had lapped itself and come back around to functional. "We had Price's line flagged after the Decker situation. Call lasted 11 minutes. Price told him to say nothing, do nothing, and that the materials Monroe had collected were circumstantial without corroborating financial testimony." A pause. Greele's response was that he had someone inside the state oversight office who could delay any formal referral for 60 to 90 days. Cole said nothing. "That's obstruction on top of the underlying fraud," Marsh said, "and it means the 60 to 90-day window is the thing we need to close before they can use it." Another pause. "I'm filing for an emergency evidence preservation order at 7 this morning. I need Claire Monroe's lawyer on the phone by 6:30 to confirm the backup locations are secured under attorney-client protection before I file." "I'll wake her," Cole said. "Barrett, I'll be careful about it." He was already standing. 6:30. He ended the call and stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the house. Nothing moved. The snow outside had shifted from falling to a low, steady hiss against the windows, which meant it was still coming but had lost the violence of earlier. He went upstairs and knocked on the guest room door twice, quietly, the way you knocked when the goal was to wake one specific person without waking the others. He heard movement almost immediately, not the disoriented scramble of someone pulled from deep sleep, but the quick-oriented response of someone who hadn't been sleeping hard. The door opened 6 inches. Claire Monroe looked at him through the gap with the alert, already processing expression of someone who had developed, over 8 months of living in a low-grade emergency, a hair trigger between sleep and functional. "Something happened," she said. "Not a question." Greele called Price. "Marsh has it on a line flag. She's filing for an evidence preservation order at 7, and she needs your lawyer confirmed on the backup locations by 6:30. Claire processed this in approximately 2 seconds. "Phone?" "Landline's downstairs." She was pulling on her cardigan before she finished the word. "Give me 2 minutes." He went back to the kitchen, turned the coffee maker back on it, had shut off on its timer, and stood at the window while it worked.
Yeah.
Sky was still fully dark and would be for another hour at least. The street was empty, the snow undisturbed on the road surface since Salazar's last pass. Claire came downstairs at 4:58. She went directly to the landline and dialed from memory the lawyer's number, apparently one of those facts that had been repeated enough to become automatic. Cole stayed at the counter and did not listen to the call, but he could hear the rhythm of it, the brief pause of a line that rang twice before it was answered, which meant Okonkwo had been awake already or was a very light sleeper, and then Claire's voice dropping into the low, direct register she used when she was working, when she was the accountant who had documented a fraud, and not the mother who had spent a blizzard worrying about her children. She talked for 9 minutes. At the end, she said, "Thank you, Adeze. I know it's early," and the response on the other end was apparently short because Claire said, "I know. That's why I called you," and hung up. She stood at the wall for a moment with her hand still on the receiver. "She's already drafted the confirmation filing," Claire said. "She drafted it 2 days ago. She said she expected they'd move when they ran out of other options." A small, exhausted pause. She called it predictable. "Smart lawyer," Cole said. "Frighteningly smart lawyer." Claire turned from the wall. She said the inside contact at the oversight office, if Greel actually has one, probably buys them less time than he thinks. The preservation order supersedes any administrative delay. Marsh knows that. That's why she's filing at 7 instead of waiting for business hours. Claire came to the counter and accepted the coffee Cole had poured. She didn't sit. She stood beside him and looked at the window and the darkness outside, and they were quiet for a moment in the way of two people who had exhausted the transactional portion of a conversation and arrived at the part that didn't require words. "The contact," she said finally, "inside the oversight office. That's the part that—" She stopped. "That means it goes further than Greel," Cole said. "Yes. Voss's office is going to find it," he said. "The preservation order is going to freeze every document trail simultaneously. Whatever the contact was supposed to delay, they won't have time to sanitize it." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "You sound very certain." "I've watched people try to clean up quickly," he said, "under time pressure, in a system with multiple independent evidence sets. They always miss something, usually several somethings." He paused. Claire built 4 independent copies specifically so that cleaning up quickly wasn't possible. She looked at him sideways. "You keep giving me credit for things you helped with. I held a flash drive for 40 minutes and talked to a man in some trees." He looked at her directly. "You built the case. That's not modesty on my part. It's just the accurate distribution." She was quiet for a moment. "Then why does that matter to you?" "The accuracy of it." He thought about that. He thought about 12 years of work where the attribution was deliberately wrong, where the point was invisibility, where the accurate distribution of credit was not only irrelevant but counterproductive. He thought about 4 years of trying to build something that was just his, in a small city with a kid and a dog and a Tuesday ritual. Because you're going to spend the next several months in rooms where people are going to try to rewrite what happened, he said. And you need to know what actually happened without any ambiguity so they can't move you off it. He held her gaze. "You did this. All of it. Don't let anyone adjust that, including me." Claire Monroe looked at him for a long moment in the dim kitchen light. With the coffee between her hands and the landline on the wall behind her, and the faint sound of the snow against the windows, and something in her face settled into a place that hadn't been accessible to it for a while, something past exhausted, past frightened, past the controlled precision she'd needed to get through the last 8 months. Something that looked, quietly and without ceremony, like a person who had been told the truth and recognized it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood at the counter and drank their coffee in the dark until the sky outside began very slowly to consider the possibility of morning. At 6:15, Sadie appeared at the kitchen doorway in her chair, which she'd apparently navigated the upstairs hallway in without waking anyone, and looked at both of them with the evaluating expression that was simply her face engaging with information. "You've been up all night," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation filed accurately. "Most of it," Cole said. She looked at her mother. Is it okay? Claire looked at her daughter. Going to be okay. Sadie held her mother's gaze for a moment, running the same rigorous internal check she ran on everything. Then she nodded once, the specific nod that meant the information had been received and assessed and provisionally accepted pending further evidence. She rolled to the counter, looked at Cole. Can I have coffee? No hot chocolate? That I can do. He made it from scratch, not from a packet, because the packets were Jamie's and he'd learned not to touch them, and Sadie wrapped her hands around the mug, the same way her mother wrapped hers around coffee, and the three of them stood in the kitchen as the sky outside moved from black to the deep blue-gray of a winter morning coming in reluctantly. And nobody said anything for a while because nothing needed to be said, and sometimes that was the most accurate thing available. 6:28, Cole picked up the landline and called Marsh's direct number and said, "Lawyer is confirmed and standing by. Files are secured." Marsh said, filing at 7, and ended the call. Cole set the receiver back in the cradle. He looked at the window. Sky was lighter now, not bright, not the soft drama of a sunrise worth describing, just the slow, ordinary fact of morning arriving to replace the night, the way it did every day without requiring acknowledgement or applause. It was enough. It was, in the particular arithmetic of the last 10 hours, considerably more than enough. The front door opened at 8:17. Detective Marsh came in first, which Cole had expected, followed by a man he hadn't mid-60s, silver-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than Cole's monthly utilities, and carrying a leather document case with the practiced ease of someone who'd been carrying one for 30 years. He introduced himself as Harlan Voss, special investigator with the State Attorney General's office, and he said it the way people said things when they wanted you to understand the title was not ceremonial. Cole shook his hand, assessed him in the way he assessed everyone: the grip, the eye contact, the specific geometry of how he positioned himself in an unfamiliar room, and decided he was competent and probably difficult and almost certainly useful. Mr. Barrett Voss said, looking around the kitchen with the neutral expression of someone cataloging a scene. Detective Marsh speaks highly of your involvement last night. Detective Marsh is generous, Cole said. She's actually not, Voss said. That's why I'm here at 8 in the morning. He set his document case on the counter without asking. Is Ms. Monroe available? She's upstairs. Give her 10 minutes. Voss looked at his watch, then at Cole. All right. Marsh had already moved to the kitchen table, where Jamie and Sadie had finished breakfast, and were now engaged in something that appeared to involve Jamie's phone and Sadie's running critical commentary on whatever was on the screen. Eli had been extracted from the mixing bowl and was on the floor with a wooden spoon that he was using as both a musical instrument and a diplomatic envoy to Ranger, who was accepting the diplomatic overtures with regal patience. How'd he sleep? Marsh asked, nodding toward Eli. Like someone with no outstanding concerns, Cole said. She almost smiled. She had the kind of face where almost smiles were the primary currency. The two from the corner, Decker and Holt. They lawyered up at 2:30. But before they did, Holt the woman gave us a name. Cole waited. She said their client contact was a man named Reeves. No first name given. She said all her communications went through him, and she didn't know who he worked for above the consulting firm level. Marsh paused. Also said Reeves was the person who'd been at the maintenance building last night. In the trees, Cole thought about the voice, the flat measured register, the immediate recalculation. She gave him up, Cole said. She gave him up because she'd apparently figured out, somewhere between midnight and 2:30, that she was the lowest value piece on the board, and she didn't plan to be the one who absorbed the weight of this. Marsh looked at him evenly, which suggests she had some sense of how much weight there was. Northfield Advisory is bigger than Millhaven, Cole said. Your read last night was right. She said it without elaboration, in the way of someone who'd spent the early morning having conversations that confirmed things. Voss's office has had a parallel file open for 8 months on a pattern of nonprofit funding manipulation in 3 counties. Different organizations, same structural signatures, shell contractors, transport contract kickbacks, security firms used for witness management. She paused on those last two words in a way that was deliberate. Harbor Bridge is the fourth organization, and the clearest documentation set they've seen. Cole was quiet for a moment. Because Claire Monroe is thorough. Because Claire Monroe is exceptionally thorough. Marsh said it without qualification. Voss's team has been trying to establish the Northfield connection for 4 months. She did it in 3 weeks with restricted database access and a photograph taken on her personal phone. From upstairs came the sound of movement, Claire navigating the stairs, the rhythm of her compensating for the ankle. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in fresh clothes, her lawyer's voice still slightly in her posture, and she looked at Voss and his document case, and then at Cole with the expression of someone who needed a half-second of context before they walked into a room. Cole said, "Harlan Voss, State AG's office. He's been building the case you just finished." Claire looked at Voss for a long moment. Then she straightened slightly and crossed the kitchen and held out her hand. Claire Monroe. Voss shook it. He looked at her with the specific attention of someone seeing in person a thing they've been reading about for months. "Ms. Monroe, your documentation work has been, frankly, it's been extraordinary. I've had professional forensic accountants with full system access who've produced less organized evidentiary packages." Something moved across Claire's face. Not vanity, something rawer than that. The specific expression of a person who has been told for months that what they found wasn't real and was now being told by a stranger in a good coat that it was not only real, but exemplary. She kept it contained. Just barely. "I want to understand the full scope," she said. "Not the version that protects the investigation. The actual scope." Voss looked at her for a moment, making a decision. Then he said, "Sit down." They sat at the kitchen table, Voss, Marsh, Claire, Cole remaining standing at the counter because the table was full and because he was not strictly part of this conversation, only adjacent to it. Voss opened his document case. "What you've identified at Harbor Bridge is one node in a network that appears to have been operational for approximately 4 years across this region. The mechanism is consistent: identify nonprofits with weak board oversight, place or compromise a director-level contact, route charitable funds through fraudulent contractors, collect kickbacks on service contracts, use the security consulting arrangement to manage internal whistleblowers." He paused. Manage is a soft word. The file on a caseworker in Denton County 18 months ago is less soft. Claire's jaw tightened. What happened to her? She withdrew her complaint citing personal reasons. 3 months later, she relocated out of state. He said it flatly. "We believe she was pressured. We haven't been able to prove it to the standard required for additional charges." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "The Northfield payment in my documentation," Claire said. "How does that connect?" Northfield Advisory Group functions as the financial clearing layer. Money moves from the target organization through the shell contractor, a portion routes to Northfield as a consulting fee, and from Northfield it distributes to the actual principals. Voss looked at her steadily. "Your documentation of the $87,000 payment, cross-referenced with the Lakeview Transport Contract approval timeline, is the first piece of physical evidence connecting a specific transaction at a specific organization to the Northfield account." Claire absorbed that. "I'm the first one to document it. In a way that holds up, yes. The others were managing situations before documentation could be established." He said it plainly. "You managed to build the documentation before they understood what you were doing. Partly because your access was restricted, and they assumed that meant you couldn't continue. And partly," he paused, and something in his expression shifted into territory that wasn't quite admiration, but was in the same building. "Partly because you were more careful than they anticipated someone in your position would be." Someone in your position. Cole heard it the same way Claire heard it, the embedded assumption, the institutional shorthand for a single mother, an accountant, a person operating without resources or backing or a title that commanded attention. Thing people said when they meant we didn't expect much from you, but had learned to dress it in language that didn't admit that. Claire said nothing, but her hands on the table pressed flat, and Cole recognized the gesture. "Warren Greal," she said. "What happens to him today?" He was contacted this morning at 6:45 by two agents from my office. He is currently in a room with his lawyer. Voss's voice was completely even. Gerald Price, interestingly, withdrew from that representation at approximately 7 this morning. Greel has a different lawyer now. Price withdrew. Price is a pragmatic man. Marsh said it from beside Voss, dry and without commentary. The board members who approved the Lakeview contract, Claire said, the unanimous vote. 3 of the 7 board members are cooperating as of this morning. They are characterizing their votes as made under incomplete information. Voss held her gaze. The remaining 4 are represented by counsel and have declined to make statements. That's a euphemism for something, Claire said. It's several euphemisms for several things, Voss said, which we'll sort out over the coming weeks. Sadie had gone quiet across the table. Cole had noticed it a few minutes ago, the shift from the running commentary on Jamie's phone to a specific stillness, the listening without appearing to listen posture that he'd watched her deploy in the diner. She was looking at the table surface and processing everything in the room with the focused absorption of a 10-year-old who understood that what was being said in this kitchen mattered more than what was being said to her specifically. Jamie, for his part, had put his phone away and was sitting with his elbows on the table and his chin in his hands, watching the adults talk with the particular expression of a child who has decided not to ask the questions he has because the room is already full of them. Eli, on the floor, had discovered that if you hit the wooden spoon against the base of the cabinet, you produced a sound, and was conducting a methodical investigation of whether this remained true across different cabinet surfaces. The families, Claire said, the ones the funding was supposed to reach. Wheelchair ramps, therapy equipment, transportation, the families who didn't get what they needed. Voss paused for the first time in the conversation, not an evasive pause, a genuine one. Recovery of diverted funds in cases like this depends on what assets can be traced and seized. It's a process. Not all of it comes back. How much? We don't know yet. The total diversion across all 4 organizations is still being calculated. He looked at her. The Harbor Bridge component, based on your documentation, is between 400 and 800,000, depending on what the full contractor review shows. Claire was quiet. Some will come back, Voss said. Not all. But the structural damage, the fake contractors, the transport contract that went to a storefront, those get corrected. Programs get rebuilt under oversight. He paused. That part we can guarantee. The room was quiet except for Eli's ongoing investigation of cabinet acoustics. Then Sadie said, without looking up from the table, "What about the people who scared the other woman away? The one in Denton County?" Everyone looked at her. She looked up. Her expression was direct and completely without apology for having spoken. "You said she withdrew and relocated. Is anyone doing anything about that?" Voss looked at Sadie for a moment. "We're working on it," he said. "It's harder to prove than financial crimes." "That's not a satisfying answer," Sadie said. "No," Voss said. "It's not." He said it without condescension or softening, just the flat truth. And something in Sadie's expression registered that she respected that more than a better-sounding answer would have earned. "We'll keep working on it," Marsh said. "That's all we can promise." Sadie looked at Marsh. Then she looked back at the table. She nodded once, not satisfied, but acknowledging the terms. Cole put more coffee on. The morning was going to run long. Ran until nearly noon. Voss and Marsh covered everything: the statement from the night before, the documentation on the drive, the location of the safety deposit box, and the cloud backup, and the colleague at the nonprofit oversight office who'd been holding a sealed drive for 3 days. Claire walked them through the Northfield payment in granular detail, the transaction dates, the file directory, the metadata that confirmed when each document had been created and accessed. She sat at the kitchen table for 3.5 hours and answered every question they had, as in some they hadn't thought to ask, and she did it with the organized precision of someone who had spent 8 months building something to survive exactly this kind of interrogation. Cole cooked lunch. Not elaborately grilled cheese and tomato soup, the thing that existed in his refrigerator and required the least thought. He fed Jamie and Sadie and Eli and kept coffee coming for the table and said almost nothing, because nothing he had to say was as useful as what Claire was saying, and he understood the difference between being present and being relevant. At 11:40, Claire's lawyer, a woman named Adeza Okonkwo, 2 counties over, who had apparently been awake since before Claire called her at 8, arrived in a car that was cleaner than everything else in the street and came in with the brisk, organized as energy of someone who had been waiting for this moment for longer than overnight. She reviewed everything, asked Voss several questions that made him recalibrate his phrasing on answers, and at the end confirmed that Claire Monroe was cooperating fully and that any preemptive legal action from Harbor Bridge or affiliated counsel would be met with a counterfiling that Okonkwo appeared to have already drafted. When Voss and Marsh finally left at 11:53, the kitchen felt like a room that had just put down something heavy. Claire sat at the table with both hands around an empty coffee mug and looked at nothing specific for a long moment. "It's real," she said. "Not to anyone in particular." "Yeah," Cole said, "all of it. 8 months of thinking I was possibly losing my mind, that I was seeing patterns that weren't there, that I was making it worse for my kids by pushing." She stopped. "It was real." "It was always real," Sadie said from across the table. Claire looked at her daughter. Sadie looked back. "You knew it was real. You just needed them to know it too." She said it simply, without drama, the way someone stated something that had always been obvious to them. Now they do. The silence that followed that wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of something that had been held under pressure for a long time, releasing gradually into ordinary air. Cole went to the sink and ran the water and washed the mugs and the lunch plates because were there. And it was something to do that wasn't watching a family process a morning they'd earned. He kept his back to the room and listened to the ordinary sounds of it, Claire and Okonkwo speaking quietly about the next steps, Jamie's chair scraping back as he went to find something, Eli conducting his ongoing research into household acoustics with a different wooden utensil he'd found. Ranger came and sat beside Cole at the sink. "Yeah," Cole said to him quietly. Ranger put his chin on Cole's forearm. The afternoon was quieter. Okonkwo left at 1 with a list of things to file and a timeline that she characterized as aggressive but achievable. Claire called her former colleague at the nonprofit oversight office and told her she could open the drive now and listen to the woman's reaction. And when she came back to the kitchen, her eyes were slightly stiff in the way. Eyes were slightly different when you'd just heard something you'd needed to hear. "She said she'd been worried about me," Claire said. "She said she kept the drive in her desk, and she looked at it every morning." Cole nodded. "She cried a little." Claire paused. "I didn't expect that. People worry about the people they can't help yet," Cole said. "When the help finally arrives, it goes somewhere." Claire looked at him. That's a specific way to understand something." He shrugged slightly. It was just a thing he knew. In the afternoon, Claire and the kids moved to a hotel 2 miles from Cole's house, a decent one, not extravagant, with a ground floor accessible room and a parking lot that Salazar had agreed to add to his patrol route for the next week. Okonkwo had recommended it, and the AG's office had an informal arrangement with the property that Cole didn't ask about. It was sensible, and it was secure, and it was time. He helped carry things to the car. There wasn't much. They'd arrived with almost nothing, and the morning had produced some additions from Donna at the diner, who had sent Kezia over at 9 with a bag that contained children's clothes in approximately correct sizes, and some dry goods and a note that said simply from the Tuesday regulars, which was an invention that everyone accepted gracefully. At the car, with Eli in the carrier strapped across Claire's chest, and the ankle brace visible below her jeans, and Sadie positioned by the rear door, Claire turned to Cole, and they stood in the cold for a moment without either of them filling it. "I don't know how to," she started. "You don't have to," he said. "That's a convenient answer for you. It's the accurate one." He looked at her steadily. "You did the work. All of it. For 8 months before last night, and for 3.5 hours in my kitchen this morning. I drove on a highway and stood in some trees. You talked someone out of whatever that was going to be. He made his own decision." "Cole," She said his name, the way people said a name when they were done with a particular conversational approach and were going to say what they actually meant. Thank you. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, because sometimes that was the right response and every other available response was less accurate. She got into the car. Sadie had not gotten in yet. She was looking at Cole from beside the rear door with the evaluating, rigorous expression that he had come to understand was simply how she engaged with the world, not suspicious, not calculating, just genuinely looking. "Will we see you again?" she said. He thought about that honestly rather than reflexively. Probably. Millhaven's not a big city. That's not a real answer. "I eat at Patty's on Tuesdays," he said. "You're ever there?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Ranger, who was sitting beside Cole on the driveway, and she reached out and put her hand on the dog's head, and Ranger leaned into it with the full, uncomplicated weight of an animal who had made his decision about a person and was communicating it clearly. "Thank you," Sadie said.
Nah, Cole.
To Ranger. Then she got in the car. Cole stood in the driveway and watched them go, and the car turned at the end of the street and was gone. And he stood there for a moment longer in the January cold before Ranger pressed against his leg and he put his hand on the dog's back and they went inside. The weeks that followed were not clean or fast or dramatically satisfying in the way that resolutions were that didn't understand how resolutions actually worked. Warren Greal was formally charged 41 days after the night of the storm. Charges were substantial fraud, conspiracy, misappropriation of charitable funds, and the filing ran to 37 pages that contained, in footnoted form, Claire Monroe's documentation at nearly every critical junction. His lawyer, the replacement for Price, who'd departed early, entered a not guilty plea and requested a delay that the court granted for 60 days. Greal was released on bail. He did not go back to the Harbor Bridge office. He did not, apparently, go many places. 2 board members entered plea agreements and cooperated fully with the state investigation. The other 2 retained separate counsel and were facing the specific legal future of people who had voted unanimously for something without reading what they were voting for, which is a future that moves slowly and expensively toward a destination nobody with legal fees enjoys. Gerald Price's license was not suspended. It was reviewed. The review was ongoing. His firm's website removed Harbor Bridge from its listed clients within 72 hours of the charges being filed, which was a speed that itself communicated something. Northfield Advisory Group, the entity, the name, the shell that had moved money across 3 counties and 4 organizations for 4 years, was the center of a federal investigation that Cole knew about because the 2-letter code on his phone sent him periodic updates, not detailed, just enough to indicate that it was moving. The principals of the security consulting firm that Decker and Holt worked for were subpoenaed in the 2nd month. Decker and Holt themselves had entered their own cooperation discussions shortly after Holt named Reeves, who turned out to have a last name and a history that ran considerably further than Millhaven County. Cole read the updates when they came in and didn't discuss them with anyone except Ranger, who had no opinions about federal investigations but was a reliable audience. The Harbor Bridge Foundation itself did not close. The board was reorganized under court supervision, new members, new director, an external oversight arrangement brokered by Voss's office that had actual teeth rather than advisory committee teeth. 3 of the 5 programs that had been degraded or defunded during Greal's tenure were reinstated. The transportation contracts were audited, Lakeview Mobility Services was dissolved, and a replacement arrangement was put in place with a legitimate operator whose physical address was a building that contained actual vehicles. The recovered funds, when the accounting was finally completed in the 3rd month, totaled $312,000 out of a documented diversion of approximately $640,000. Roughly half. Not all of it, not even most of it, but real money returning to real programs for families who needed wheelchair ramps and therapy appointments and a van that showed up on the day it was supposed to. Cole heard about the recovery figure from Marsh, who told him over coffee in his kitchen on a Wednesday morning, which had apparently become a thing that happened now. Half, he said. Little over half, Marsh said. The rest is in assets that are going to take civil litigation to recover and may never fully come back. How does Claire feel about it? I talked to her yesterday. Marsh wrapped her hands around the mug. She said she was glad it was half. She said the caseworker in Denton County got a settlement offer from the Northfield principal's attorney as last week. Confidential, but her lawyer described it as meaningful. Cole said nothing. The woman is going back to her home county, Marsh said. She's been living in a rental apartment in another state for 18 months. He looked at his coffee. Good. Yeah. Marsh was quiet for a moment. Voss wants to know if you'd be open to a consulting conversation. Informal, about a related matter. No, he figured. He told me to ask anyway. Tell him I appreciate the thought. I'll tell him you said no without embellishment, which is what I already assumed. She finished her coffee and stood. You know what the Nonprofit Oversight Board is doing? The one that originally bounced Claire's complaint to the advisory committee. Probably not enough, Cole said. Slightly more than not enough. They're instituting an independent review process for whistleblower complaints. External reviewers, conflict of interest disclosures required. She paused. Came out of the Harbor Bridge case specifically. They cited it in the policy announcement. Cole thought about that. A policy that existed because a woman had documented a fraud that a committee had refused to see, and the documentation had survived everything thrown at it, and eventually the weight of what it contained had been enough to move things that bureaucracies didn't naturally move. She should know that, he said. I told her last week. Marsh picked up her jacket. She said she hoped it would help the next person who couldn't get anyone to listen. He thought about that for a long time after Marsh left. On the first Tuesday of April, Cole took Jamie and Ranger to Patty's roadside for dinner. The season had turned without ceremony. The snow was gone. The lake had lost its ice in the third week of March, and the highway looked completely different in the gray-green evening light of early spring. Patty's looked the same inside, which was one of the things Cole had come to appreciate about it. The same orange sign, the same booths, Donna behind the counter with the same expression of someone who had managed these tables for 22 years and had no plans to stop. They got the corner booth. Jamie ordered the grilled cheese and actually ate it this time, which was an improvement over January. Ranger was under the table with his chin on Cole's boot. They'd been there 40 minutes when the diner door opened, and Sadie Monroe came through it. No storm this time, no emergency, just a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair, navigating the threshold with the efficient, practiced motion of someone who had done it many times before. Behind her, Claire Monroe held the door, and Eli, 11 months older now, and walking with the lurching, determined instability of someone who had recently discovered locomotion and was not taking it for granted, teetered through the entrance with his arms out for balance. Sadie spotted Cole immediately. She didn't wave or call out. She just changed her direction toward the back booth without breaking stride, which he recognized as her version of acknowledgement. They rearranged the seating situation booth plus the chair from the adjacent table. For Claire, Eli installed in a high chair that Donna produced from somewhere before anyone asked. The 5 of them and the dog filled the corner, and the noise level went up by approximately 30%, which was mostly Eli's contribution. Donna took orders. Jamie and Sadie had apparently reached some prior arrangement about the phone, which resumed without preamble from wherever it had left off in January. Eli attempted to eat a napkin and was redirected toward a piece of bread. Cole and Claire sat on the same side of the extended table configuration and talked the way people talked when they'd been through something together, and the something was mostly resolved, not constantly referencing it, not avoiding it, just letting it exist as the ground under a conversation about more ordinary things. She'd gone back to work, not at Harbor Bridge, but for a regional accounting firm that did nonprofit audits, which was a turn of events that struck her as either deeply ironic or appropriate, depending on the day. The new director at Harbor Bridge had called to ask if she'd consider consulting on the program restructuring, and she'd thought about it for 2 weeks and said yes. Why yes, Cole asked. Because the programs are real, she said. The families using them are real. Someone should do that work who knows what it's supposed to look like. She paused. And because it was harder to say yes than no, which is usually a sign that yes is the right answer, he considered that. That's a rigorous framework. Sadie's. He looked at Sadie, who was fully absorbed in whatever was on Jamie's screen and not tracking their conversation. Of course it is. At the end of dinner, when the plates had been cleared and Eli was losing his battle with consciousness in the high chair, Sadie reached into the bag hanging from the back of her chair and produced a framed photograph. She set it on the table in front of Cole. It was a picture he hadn't seen before, taken the morning after the storm, in his kitchen, by someone he hadn't noticed taking it, probably Marsh, based on the angle. It showed the kitchen table, Claire with both hands around a coffee mug, Cole beside her with the exhausted, unguarded look of a person who hadn't slept, Jamie half visible at the edge of the frame, leaning against the counter, Sadie at the table with Eli on her lap, and Ranger's head resting on Sadie's knee. Nobody was posed. Nobody was looking at the camera. They were just there, in the gray morning light, in a kitchen that smelled like burned toast and coffee, looking like the unbeautiful, imperfect, completely real aftermath of a night that had asked something from all of them. Beneath the photograph, on a white border that Sadie had clearly added herself with careful, deliberate handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for believing me before you knew whether I mattered." Cole looked at it for a long time. He didn't say anything for a moment, because the thing he felt wasn't the clean, named emotion that language was designed for. It was something more specific, something that had to do with the gap between who he'd been and who he was now, and the distance a person could travel between those 2 points if they were lucky enough and stubborn enough and had the right people show up on the right stormy night. "Sadie," he said. She looked up from the phone. "You know who saved your family that night?" She started to look at Ranger, which he had expected. "Don't look at the dog," he said. She looked back at him. "You walked half a mile in a blizzard with your brother in your arms," he said. "You knew exactly what you were carrying and exactly who to bring it to and exactly what to say when you got there. You did all of that right." He held her gaze. "That's not nothing. That's not small. That's the whole thing." Sadie looked at him with the rigorous, evaluating expression that was simply her face doing what it always did. Then she said, "You drove on a highway and stood in some trees." Cole looked at her. Then, for the first time in the telling of this story, he laughed. A real one, surprised out of him, unguarded, the kind that arrived before you could decide whether it was appropriate. Jamie looked over. Claire looked over. Even Ranger lifted his head. "Yeah," Cole said, when it had passed. "That's about right." Sadie nodded, with the satisfaction of someone who had made a precise point and had the evidence to back it up. He took the photograph and looked at it again. The unposed, imperfect, completely real image of a morning that had been earned through a night that had cost something. He thought about what it took to believe in a thing when everyone with authority to confirm it had told you it wasn't there. The specific endurance of that, not dramatic, not military, not the kind of courage that showed up in headlines, just a woman at a kitchen table with restricted file access and a personal phone camera doing the work every day for 8 months because someone had to, because the families were real. He set the photograph down and looked at the table. Eli was definitively asleep in the high chair, mouth open, small fist curled on the tray. Jamie and Sadie were laughing at something on the screen, the easy, involuntary laugh of two people who were simply in the same place at the same time and found it sufficient. Claire had her hands around a fresh cup of coffee and was watching her children with the specific quality of attention that belonged to people who had recently remembered, with great clarity, that the things in front of them were not guaranteed. Ranger had come out from under the table and was resting his chin on Sadie's knee. She'd put her hand on his head without looking. The diner was warm. The highway outside was quiet in the way April highways were quiet, not the white silence of snow, but the dark, open quiet of a road that went in both directions and was not, tonight, anyone's emergency. Cole picked up the photograph and held it for a moment. Then he set it carefully beside his plate, where he could see it. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the table, at all of it, the ordinary, imperfect, completely real gathering of people who had come through something together and had arrived here on an ordinary Tuesday in April and found that what remained was worth staying for. This was enough. This had always been enough. The most dangerous thing in any room is not the person who shouts the loudest. It's the quiet voice no one expects to be right. Believe it anyway. It matters more than you know.